All right, welcome to the deep dive. Today we're lacing up, or maybe unlacing, as we look into the world of barefoot running. And this is a deep dive just for you, our listener, because you're the one who sent us this really fascinating topic. Maybe you're thinking about ditching the shoes to prevent some injuries, or maybe you're just looking for a more natural way to hit the pavement, so to speak. Well, whatever got you interested in barefoot running, we're going to dig into it.
Yeah, that's right. You sent us this really comprehensive article. It's called The Complete Guide to Barefoot Running from Sundried. And it's really packed with info on the benefits, the techniques, even the risks, and really how to make that transition from, traditional shoes to running barefoot. So we're going to pull out the most important insights from this guide and hopefully give you a solid grasp of the principles of barefoot running, the science behind it, and what it really takes to, potentially make the switch.
Okay, so first things first. Barefoot running, right. Seems like it's having a real moment right now. Why is that? Why are people going back to basics when we've got all this amazing footwear technology available?
Well, it's interesting, and it might seem like a new trend, but as the article points out, running barefoot is actually, well, it's how humans have been running for, most of our history. It's our
Mm.
natural state, really.
Yeah.
And the guide suggests that this renewed interest is partly due to some influential books like Born to Run, which
Hmm.
really promoted this idea of, you know, getting back to those evolutionary roots, getting back to a more natural and more biomechanically efficient way to run.
Oh, yeah, Born to Run. I remember that book, and it definitely got people thinking twice about all the cushioning and support in their fancy shoes. Yeah.
It did. It did. And the guide acknowledges this whole idea of this narrative, but
Mhm.
it's, careful to point out that there's still a lot of debate in the running community, even among researchers. It's not a cut and dry issue, right?
Mm.
And it's also interesting that the article brings up minimalist footwear as a kind of stepping stone. Like, you don't have to go straight to bare feet. You can ease into it.
Right, like a more gradual approach. Okay, so besides the whole back to nature appeal, what are the actual benefits? What can someone realistically expect to gain from ditching the shoes?
Well, the guide dives into both the biomechanical and physiological aspects of this. And one of the biggest arguments for barefoot running is the potential for strengthening the foot and lower leg muscles.
Mm.
Makes sense,
Yep.
right? When you take away the support of shoes, all those small muscles in your feet have to work a lot harder to stabilize you. And that, over time can lead to stronger feet, ankles, even stronger arches.
Makes sense. It's like those muscles have been kind of, I don't know, getting lazy in their comfy shoes.
Yeah, exactly. And then there's the whole energy efficiency thing. This is fascinating. Some research suggests that running barefoot can actually require less energy than running in shoes.
Really? I would have thought the opposite.
Yeah, it's counterintuitive, isn't it? But think about it. Every time your foot lifts off the ground, you're not lifting that extra weight of the shoe. And, the guide mentions that studies have shown that the added mass of a shoe can actually increase your oxygen uptake and your perceived exertion. So lighter feet, potentially less effort.
Interesting. So it's not just about feeling more natural. It could actually make you a more efficient runner.
Potentially, yes. And then there are the biomechanical changes that the guide talks about. The biggest one is the foot strike. Barefoot runners tend to land on the forefoot or midfoot. It's
Yeah.
a big difference from the heel strike, which is, pretty typical for people who wear shoes. And this change in foot strike often leads to shorter steps, a higher cadence, more steps per minute. And you also spend less time in contact with the ground with each step, which is interesting.
So instead of that big long stride and landing on your heel, it's more like quick, light steps landing on the ball of your foot.
Yeah, exactly. And this shift in foot strike, it has a lot of implications for how your body manages impact. The guide says that landing on your forefoot or midfoot usually results in lower collision forces compared to that heel strike. And there's research, according to the article, that's shown less extension moment and power absorption at the knee joint. That force that your knee has to deal with to straighten and push you forward. Barefoot running tends to reduce that.
So potentially less stress on the knees, which I know is a big concern for a lot of runners.
Yeah, that's what the research suggests. And the guide also talks about something called proprioceptive feedback, which basically means your body's ability to sense its position and movement. And without the thick cushioning of shoes, your feet can send more detailed signals to your brain about the surface you're running on. So it can potentially improve your balance and just your overall awareness of your body in motion.
So your feet become more like sensitive to what's going on under them.
Exactly, yeah. But It's important to point out that the guide is very balanced in its presentation. It acknowledges that the scientific findings aren't always consistent. Some studies haven't shown huge differences in overall injury rates. And, those metabolic advantages compared to lightweight shoes, those are still being debated. And the guide even mentions that some research has shown a potential increase in Achilles tendon and calf injuries in barefoot runners. So it's not a guaranteed path to injury-free running, that's for sure.
Right, so it's not a magic bullet. It has its own set of potential risks.
Right, exactly. And the guide also explains that, that change in foot strike, while it might reduce stress on the knees, it actually puts more demands on your ankles and calves. And that really highlights why transitioning gradually is so important. Rushing into barefoot running is one of the biggest causes of injury.
So you really have to listen to your body and take it slow.
Absolutely. And to illustrate all of this, the guide actually includes a really helpful table. It's Table 1, and it's titled Biomechanical Differences Between Barefoot and Shod Running.
Okay, and what does Table 1 tell us?
Well, it basically lays out all the key differences, things like foot strike, stride length, cadence, ground contact time. And it shows that barefoot running typically involves a forefoot or midfoot strike, shorter strides, a higher cadence, and less time spent on the ground with each step. It also usually results in lower impact forces and less stress on the knee joint. But on the flip side, there's more power generation and absorption happening at the ankle joint compared to shod running, where you see more heel striking, longer strides, lower cadence, longer ground contact time, higher impact forces, and more stress on the knee. So basically, barefoot running shifts that impact absorption from the heel and knee to the forefoot and ankle, making the posterior chain work harder, but potentially protecting the knees a bit.
Okay, so that's a really clear breakdown of the physical changes that happen. Now, let's say someone is intrigued by all of this and wants to give barefoot running a try. What's the correct way to do it? What's the technique? Because it can't just be taking off your shoes and running like you normally do, right?
No, definitely not. The guide is very clear about that. You absolutely have to learn the proper technique, especially if you're used to, landing on your heel. It's all about how your foot strikes the ground, your cadence, and your overall posture.
Okay, so let's start with the foot strike. What's the ideal way for your foot to make contact with the ground?
Well, the article really emphasizes landing on the forefoot or midfoot and right underneath your body, as opposed to that heel strike that we were talking about. It even uses this phrase, gentle touch, with the forefoot or midfoot followed by the heel, just kind of kissing the ground lightly. The key is to avoid that hard heel strike, especially without the cushion of a shoe.
So it's not necessarily just landing on your toes.
No, not exactly. The guide says both forefoot and midfoot strikes can work, and, the best one for you might depend on how your body's built, how fast you're running, and, what feels most natural. But the important thing is to land with your foot beneath you, not reaching out ahead with your leg, because that's what creates those braking forces that you want to avoid.
Got it. So land more underneath, towards the front of the foot. And what about cadence? The article mentioned taking more steps per minute.
Yeah, the guide recommends a cadence of about 170 to 180 steps per minute. This higher step rate, it helps reduce those impact forces, prevents overstriding, and allows you to utilize, the springiness in your tendons more efficiently. And it suggests focusing on taking shorter, quicker steps. You can even use a metronome or listen to music with a really strong beat to kind of train your body into this new rhythm.
Wow, 170 to 180. That's a lot more steps than I think I usually take. It must feel really, really different.
Yeah, it probably will at first. And the guide does say that, 180 steps per minute isn't a magic number for everybody. It can vary depending on your leg length and the train and, all sorts of things. But the principle of a higher cadence leading to less time spent on the ground with each step, that's key for reducing impact.
Okay, foot strike, cadence. What about posture? How should you be holding your body when running barefoot?
Well, the guide stresses the importance of a tall, aligned spine, not slouching. And you want a slight forward lean, but that lean should come from your ankles, not from bending at the waist. Shoulders relaxed, core engaged for stability. And what's interesting is that the article actually says that minimalist shoes can help with posture. Because they don't have that raised heel or all that extra structure, they kind of encourage you to maintain a more natural alignment.
So they kind of force you to use your body correctly.
Yeah, in a way, yeah. The biggest thing to avoid is overstriding, reaching your leg out too far in front of you. And again, that slight forward lean from the ankles, that's really crucial for encouraging that forefoot or midfoot strike.
Right, so it's almost like you're kind of falling forward a little bit and your feet are just catching you.
That's a good way to think about it. Yeah, it's about letting gravity do some of the work for you rather than actively pushing off with your legs.
So we've got the technique down, but all this sounds great in theory, but, actually making this switch after years of running in shoes, landing on your heel, that sounds like a big challenge.
It is. It is. And the guide dedicates a whole section to the transition process. It really emphasizes that this is not something you should rush into. It's a journey, it takes time.
So how long are we talking about here? I mean, it's not like you can just switch overnight, right?
No, definitely not. The article says it can take anywhere from, a few months to even a year for your body to fully adapt to barefoot running. And it stresses the importance of, paying close attention to how you feel, avoiding those big jumps in mileage or intensity. And it really, really recommends consulting with a healthcare professional or a running coach who specializes in barefoot running, especially if you have any, pre-existing foot problems or a history of injuries.
That sounds like really good advice. Don't just try to do it all on your own.
Yeah, exactly. And, there's that 10% rule in running, where you only increase your mileage by 10% each week. But the guide actually says that for barefoot running, it's even more important to focus on your form, how you feel, rather than just sticking to a strict mileage increase. Be flexible. Listen to your body.
Okay, so it's more about feeling it out rather than following a rigid plan. So, what are some like concrete steps someone can take to start this transition?
Well, the guide suggests starting really simple. Just spend more time barefoot in your daily life. Walk around your house barefoot, do chores barefoot. This helps your feet get used to not having that support and starts to strengthen those muscles. And then you can gradually introduce some really short barefoot runs, but on soft surfaces like grass or, even a track.
So like baby steps, literally.
Exactly, baby steps. And the guide also talks about minimalist shoes as a good, kind of intermediary step. You can start with short runs in those and slowly increase the distance as you get stronger. Another method they mention is gradually reducing the heel drop in your regular running shoes. So, kind of weaning yourself off that heel elevation.
Interesting. So there are a few different paths you can take. Does the guide say if one approach is better than another?
There's a debate about that. Some people think the gradual progression with minimalist shoes is best, to let your body adapt more slowly. Others believe going straight to barefoot running is more effective because you get that immediate feedback from the ground, which can help you correct your form faster. So, ultimately, it's up to you what feels right for your body.
And how do you know if you're progressing at the right pace? Like, how do you know if you're pushing too hard?
Well, the guide is all about, being aware of your body. It says you need to pay close attention to any pain or discomfort and stop immediately if you feel any sharp pain. Check your feet regularly for blisters, soreness, any signs of injury. And it even recommends keeping a training log so you can track your mileage, the surfaces you're running on, any problems you're having. That can really help you catch things early on.
Right. So it's like you're learning a new language with your body.
Yeah, exactly. You're teaching your body to move in a completely different way. And the guide actually provides an example of a gradual transition plan in Table 3.
Okay, what does that look like? What's in Table 3?
Well, it outlines a sample plan over several weeks, and it details, how much barefoot walking you should do, how long your barefoot runs should be, when to incorporate minimalist shoes, things like that. And each week, the focus changes. First it's getting used to the feeling, then it's working on your form, then building strength, and then finally increasing your endurance. But the guide makes it clear that this is just an example. Everyone's going to progress at their own pace. The key is to listen to your body and adjust the plan as needed.
Okay, so the transition is a long game. You got to be patient. Now, let's say someone transitions perfectly, no problems. Are there still inherent risks to barefoot running?
Well, the guide is honest about that. It says there are potential risks, especially during that initial transition period. Some common injuries include Achilles tendonitis, calf strains, plantar fasciitis, stress fractures in the forefoot, and other, forefoot injuries. And because your feet are more exposed, you're also more prone to cuts, bruises, blisters, even infections. And the guide mentions that ankle sprains can be more common at first, just because your ankles are working harder without the support of shoes.
Wow, that's a lot of potential problems. What makes those injuries more likely with barefoot running?
Well, the guide explains that a lot of these issues happen because barefoot running puts more stress on those muscles in the back of your lower leg, the Achilles tendon, the calves. They might not be used to that kind of load if you're used to landing on your heel. And that increased pressure on the forefoot can lead to stress fractures there. And of course, without shoes, your feet are vulnerable to everything on the ground.
No.
The guide also points out that the lack of support can make your ankles less stable.
So it's kind of a trade-off, right? Less impact on the knees, but more stress on other areas.
Right, exactly. And that's why the guide has a whole section on injury prevention.
Hmm.
And the most important thing they emphasize over and over is that gradual transition. Don't do too much too soon. Working on proper form is crucial, as is strengthening those foot and lower leg muscles. Choosing appropriate surfaces, being aware of your individual foot type and any biomechanical issues you might have, all of that plays a role.
So it's not just about taking off your shoes and going for a run. There's a lot more to it.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And the guide even has a table 2, that compares common injuries in barefoot runners versus shod runners, people who wear shoes.
Interesting. What does
Well,
that table tell us?
well, it shows that barefoot runners might have a higher risk of things like Achilles tendonitis, calf strains, stress fractures in the metatarsals, forefoot injuries, cuts, bruises, blisters, ankle sprains. But on the other hand, they might have a lower risk of plantar fasciitis, knee pain, hip pain, shin splints, quadriceps injuries. So it's really interesting how changing your running style can shift where the stress goes in your body.
Yeah, that's a good point. It's not about eliminating all injuries. It's about understanding the different risks involved. Now, we've talked a little bit about running surfaces, but the guide actually has a whole section dedicated to choosing the right surface for barefoot running. What's the main takeaway there?
Well, it's kind of surprising, actually. For beginners, they recommend hard, smooth surfaces like concrete or asphalt.
Really? I would have thought something softer, like grass or a trail would be better for barefoot running.
Yeah, it seems counterintuitive, but the guide explains that those hard surfaces actually give you better feedback on your form. If you're landing too hard or incorrectly, you'll feel it right away, and that'll force you to adjust your gait. And as you get stronger and your form improves, then you can gradually transition to softer surfaces.
So it's like a built-in feedback mechanism.
Exactly. And they say that, those softer surfaces can actually mask problems with your technique, which can make it harder to learn proper form.
So start hard, then go soft. Makes sense. Now, we've mentioned strengthening the feet and lower legs a few times. What specific exercises does the guide recommend?
Well, they give a good list of exercises for both the feet and the lower legs. For the feet, they recommend things like toe curls, picking up small objects or scrunching a towel with your toes. Heel raises, both on 2 legs and on 1 leg. Arch lifts, which are also called the short foot exercise. And then, actively spreading your toes apart, rolling a tennis ball or a golf ball under your arch, doing ankle rolls, moving your foot in and out. And then even some balance exercises like standing on 1 leg or using a balance board.
Okay, so those sound like exercises that, people can do at home, pretty easy to incorporate into a routine. What about for the lower legs?
For the lower legs, they suggest calf raises, both for the gastrocnemius and the soleus muscles. Shin raises to work those muscles on the front of your shins. Towel pulls, where you use your foot to pull a towel towards you. And then, eventually you can add some plyometric exercises like jumps and bounds, but those would come later, once you're more adapted.
So it's a whole program, really.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It is. And the guide stresses that strengthening those intrinsic foot muscles is really important. Those are the small muscles that are often neglected when we wear shoes all the time.
Right, and those muscles are key for supporting the arches, right?
Exactly. And for balance and proprioception, knowing where your foot is in space. Now, speaking of things to be aware of, the guide has a section on common mistakes that people make when transitioning to barefoot running.
Yeah.
What are some of those pitfalls to avoid?
Well, obviously, number one is rushing the transition, that too much too soon thing. But they also mention neglecting those foot strengthening exercises. And then, trying to run with the same form you use in shoes, like overstriding and heel striking, ignoring pain is a big one, pushing through discomfort, starting on those rough or uneven surfaces too early. And then also using minimalist shoes without having good form or enough foot strength. So basically, you got to be patient, you got to listen to your body, you got to do your exercises, and you got to be smart up the surfaces you run on.
Exactly. And now, for the big question, what do the experts say about all of this? Is everyone on board with the barefoot running trend?
Right, because there's always different opinions on these kinds of things.
Oh, absolutely. And the guide acknowledges that there's a wide range of opinions among experts. Some are big proponents of barefoot running. They highlight the benefits we talked about, the more natural movement, the stronger feet, the potential for better running economy, less impact on the knees and hips. But then there are others who are more cautious. They point out the risk of injuries, especially during that transition phase. They talk about the lack of protection for the feet, the need for a really gradual approach. And the guide mentions that, you'll find varying opinions among podiatrists, sports medicine doctors, running coaches. It's a debated topic for sure.
So it's not a simple yes or no answer. There are valid points on both sides.
Right. And that's why the guide encourages people to do their research, to consider their individual circumstances, and maybe even consult with a professional before making any decisions.
Yeah, that's good advice. Well, this has been a really fascinating look at the world of barefoot running, and I want to thank you, our listener, for sending in this topic and this really comprehensive guide. Just to summarize the main points, it seems like barefoot running could offer some real benefits, like stronger feet, potentially better running economy. But it requires a pretty big shift in technique and a very gradual transition to minimize the risk of injuries. And those foot strengthening exercises are key.
Absolutely, yeah. This deep dive has given us a lot to think about, but ultimately the decision of whether or not to try barefoot running is a personal one. Consider your own situation, your fitness level, and maybe talk to a professional to get some personalized advice.
And on that note, here's a final thought to leave you with. If you think about how much information your feet can sense when they're not, trapped in shoes, how might that change not just your running, but also your awareness of your body and your connection to the ground, even how you move through the world? It's something to ponder as you decide on your next steps, whether they're in shoes or maybe not.
Yeah, it really makes you think.
Thanks for joining us for this deep dive.
It's been a pleasure.